The most important thing about a person is often the one thing nobody can see. On a quiet evening in an American city, a man walked through the streets carrying a lifetime of service, discipline, and sacrifice. Yet almost no one around him knew his story. To strangers passing by, he looked like an ordinary person returning home after a long day. He was not wearing a military uniform. He was not surrounded by people announcing his achievements. There was no visible sign that revealed the years he had spent protecting and serving his country. His name was David Williams, but before anyone knew his name, he was simply another face in the crowd. What nobody could see was that David had spent more than 25 years in the United States Air Force. He had reached the rank of colonel through years of dedication, leadership, and commitment. He had carried responsibilities that required patience, discipline, and the ability to make thoughtful decisions under pressure. But on this evening, he was not thinking about his rank. He was not looking for recognition. He was simply living an ordinary moment away from the responsibilities that came with his position. Colonel David Williams understood something that many people forget. A title can describe what someone has achieved, but it cannot fully explain who they are. The true measure of a person is revealed through their choices, especially during moments when nobody knows their accomplishments. A few miles away, Officer Jason Carter was beginning his patrol. Like many law enforcement officers across the country, he carried the responsibility of serving the community and making decisions based on the information available in front of him. He had years of experience and believed strongly in his ability to handle unexpected situations. His training taught him to observe carefully, ask questions, and pay attention to details. But even experienced people can only see what is visible in the moment. They cannot immediately see the history, struggles, and achievements that exist behind a person's appearance. That evening, two different worlds were about to meet. One was represented by a man whose authority came from decades of service and quiet leadership. The other was represented by a person whose authority came from a badge and the responsibility attached to it. Neither man knew how much this encounter would reveal about respect, assumptions, and the importance of understanding people before judging them. Imagine spending your entire adult life learning discipline, leadership, and responsibility, then finding yourself in a moment where your greatest strength is not your position, but your ability to remain calm. Imagine having the power to immediately explain who you are, yet choosing patience because your character should speak before your title does. That was the mindset David carried with him. He did not need a uniform to prove his value. He did not need a rank to prove his worth. His confidence came from knowing the person he had worked hard to become. As the evening continued, nobody nearby realized that the quiet man walking through the community was not just another citizen. They did not know they were looking at a respected Air Force colonel. They did not know they were about to witness a moment that would challenge assumptions and reveal the difference between visible power and true character. Because sometimes the person who appears ordinary is the person carrying the most extraordinary story. The evening continued quietly, but the meeting between Colonel David Williams and Officer Jason Carter was moving toward a moment neither man expected. At first glance, it appeared to be a simple encounter between two strangers in a public place. But beneath that ordinary surface were two very different stories, two different experiences, and two different understandings of responsibility. David remained calm because he had spent his life learning the value of patience. During his more than 25 years in the United States Air Force, he had faced situations where emotions could not control decisions. Leadership required focus, responsibility required fairness, and respect had to be given before it was received. Those lessons stayed with him long after his military duties changed. He believed that a person's true character was not revealed when everything was easy. It was revealed when someone felt misunderstood and still chose to act with dignity. Officer Jason Carter continued handling the situation based on what he knew at that moment. His experience as a police officer taught him to observe carefully and make decisions using the information available. He believed in protecting the community and taking his responsibilities seriously. But there was one thing no amount of experience could completely eliminate: the possibility of not seeing the entire picture. Every person carries a story that is invisible at first. Every person has experiences, achievements, and struggles that cannot be recognized immediately. David understood this better than most people. Throughout his military career, he worked with individuals from different backgrounds and learned that strong leadership began with understanding others. A uniform could show a position, a title could show an achievement, but neither one could completely reveal a person's values. Those values appeared through choices, especially during moments of uncertainty. Imagine having spent decades earning a position that many people would immediately respect, yet choosing not to mention it because you believe every person deserves fairness before knowing your accomplishments. Imagine knowing that one sentence could instantly change how others see you, but deciding that patience is more important than recognition. That was the discipline David carried with him. He was not hiding his identity because he was ashamed of it. He simply believed that respect should not depend on discovering someone's background. As the interaction continued, Officer Carter began noticing details that did not match his first impression. David's calm voice, thoughtful responses, and steady presence suggested a level of confidence that came from experience rather than a desire to appear important. There was something different about him, something that showed years of preparation and responsibility. The officer did not yet know about the Air Force career, the leadership roles, or the sacrifices behind David's quiet manner. He only knew that this was not an ordinary conversation. David, however, remained focused on the same principle that guided him throughout his life: control what you can control. He could not control the assumptions others made about him. He could only control his own actions. And in that moment, he chose patience over frustration, dignity over pride, and understanding over conflict. The truth about Colonel David Williams was still hidden, but the foundation of the story was already clear. Before anyone discovered his rank, they were about to discover something even more important: the character of a man who never needed recognition to know his own worth. The evening continued, and the quiet confidence of Colonel David Williams became the most noticeable part of the encounter. He was not trying to control the situation. He was not trying to prove anything. He was simply remaining true to the principles that had guided him for decades. For David, discipline was never about appearing powerful. It was about knowing when patience was the strongest choice. Throughout his years in the United States Air Force, he had learned that leadership was often demonstrated in moments when nobody was watching. A great leader did not need constant recognition. A great leader understood that every action represented something bigger than themselves. Officer Jason Carter continued observing David, trying to understand the person standing in front of him. The officer had handled many situations during his career, and he believed that experience helped him recognize important details. But this moment reminded him of something every professional eventually learns. Experience is valuable, but humility is necessary. There will always be things that cannot be understood immediately. There will always be stories hidden behind a person's appearance. David knew this reality well. His military career introduced him to people from every part of the country, each carrying their own background and experiences. He learned that respect was not something reserved for certain positions or certain people. It was something everyone deserved from the beginning. That belief shaped the way he approached the world. He did not measure people by their clothing, their surroundings, or the assumptions others made about them. He measured them by their actions and their character. Imagine spending decades preparing yourself to lead others, only to discover that one of the greatest tests of leadership happens during an ordinary moment. Imagine having the ability to reveal your achievements and immediately change the way everyone sees you, but choosing not to because you believe the right thing should be done before recognition arrives. That was the choice David made. He understood that revealing his rank too early could change the entire meaning of the encounter. People might suddenly respond differently because they knew his title. They might show respect because of his position instead of because of who he was as a person. David believed the deeper lesson was found before that information was known. As the conversation continued, Officer Carter began noticing the qualities that could not be explained by appearance alone. David spoke with confidence but without arrogance. He remained respectful without appearing uncertain. His calm presence suggested someone who had spent years learning how to handle responsibility. These details created a different understanding of the man in front of him. The officer still did not know about the decades of military service, the leadership responsibilities, or the commitment behind David's quiet personality. But he could sense that there was something unique about this encounter. David, meanwhile, remained focused on the values he had carried throughout his entire life. He believed that every difficult moment was an opportunity to show who a person truly was. Anyone could remain respectful when they were being recognized. The real challenge was remaining respectful when they felt unseen. That was the lesson David had learned through years of service. His strength was not hidden because he lacked power. His strength was hidden because he did not need to display it. And as the evening moved forward, the truth about Colonel David Williams remained just beneath the surface. Soon, the world around him would learn what he had always known. A person's greatest achievement is not only what they accomplish, but the character they show when nobody knows their story. The evening reached a turning point as the quiet details of the encounter began to reveal something deeper. For most people watching from the outside, it still looked like a simple interaction between a police officer and a citizen. They saw a uniform, a conversation, and a moment of uncertainty. What they could not see was the history carried by the man standing calmly in front of them. Colonel David Williams continued to show the same patience that had defined his entire life. He understood that people often make decisions based on what they can immediately observe. A person's clothing, appearance, or surroundings can create assumptions before the truth has a chance to speak. But David had spent decades learning that the first impression is rarely the complete story. During his years in the United States Air Force, he had worked with leaders, service members, and communities where trust was built through actions rather than appearances. He learned that respect was strongest when it was given without conditions. Officer Jason Carter was beginning to notice that this encounter was different from what he initially expected. There was a calmness in David's words and a confidence in his attitude that came from experience. It was not the confidence of someone trying to prove superiority. It was the confidence of someone who understood his own values. The officer did not know yet that the man in front of him had spent years carrying important responsibilities in the Air Force. He did not know about the decisions David had made, the people he had guided, or the sacrifices behind his career. He only knew that this person responded in a way that showed unusual patience. Sometimes the most powerful moments are not created by dramatic actions. They are created by small choices that reveal character. David could have focused on correcting every assumption made about him. He could have allowed frustration to control the moment. Instead, he chose the same approach that had helped him throughout his military career. Remain composed, understand the situation, and respond with purpose. Imagine having a lifetime of achievements that could instantly change how people view you, but choosing to let your character speak first. Imagine knowing that a simple explanation could make people treat you differently, but wanting them to understand something more important. Respect should not depend on a title. Dignity should not depend on recognition. Those beliefs were not something David learned overnight. They were values built through years of service and leadership. As Officer Carter continued observing, the difference between appearance and reality became more noticeable. The man who seemed ordinary carried himself with the discipline of someone who had spent a lifetime preparing for responsibility. The conversation was no longer just about the situation in front of them. It became about the assumptions people carry and the importance of seeing others as complete human beings. Still, the biggest truth remained unknown. The identity of Colonel David Williams had not yet been revealed. The people around him did not know that the quiet man they were watching was someone who had earned a position of great responsibility through years of dedication. They did not know that behind the calm expression was a story of leadership, commitment, and service. But soon, that hidden chapter would come to light, and everyone would have to reconsider the person they thought they understood. The moment that changed everything began with a simple question. After watching Colonel David Williams remain calm throughout the encounter, Officer Jason Carter started to realize there was something different about the man standing in front of him. The confidence, the patience, and the way David carried himself suggested a lifetime of experience that could not be explained by a few minutes of conversation. But the truth behind that experience was still hidden. David had never introduced himself by his rank. He had never mentioned his years of service. He had never used his achievements as a reason to receive special treatment. For him, respect was not something earned only after people discovered a title. Respect was something every person deserved from the beginning. That belief came from decades of leadership in the United States Air Force. David understood that authority was not about making others feel smaller. It was about carrying responsibility with humility. Throughout his career, he had worked with people who came from different backgrounds and experiences. He learned that the strongest teams were not built through status or recognition. They were built through trust, fairness, and the understanding that every person had value. As the conversation continued, a small detail finally began to reveal the truth. A piece of information connected to David's background caught attention and changed the way the situation was viewed. Suddenly, the assumptions made earlier started to look different. The man who had appeared to be just another person walking through the community was now being seen through a completely different lens. Officer Carter learned that David Williams was not simply someone with an ordinary story. He was a colonel in the United States Air Force, a person who had dedicated more than 25 years of his life to serving the country. The discovery created a moment of reflection. The difference was not that David suddenly became important because of his rank. He had always been important. The rank only revealed what had already existed. His patience, discipline, and character were visible before anyone knew his achievements. Imagine a person spending decades proving themselves through service, leadership, and commitment, yet choosing silence when a simple explanation could change everything. Imagine having the ability to say, "You do not know who I am," but choosing instead to show the world who you are through your actions. That was the choice David made. He did not want the moment to become about power. He wanted it to become about understanding. For Officer Carter, the realization was not only about discovering David's military background. It was about recognizing a larger lesson. A person's value should never depend on whether others already know their accomplishments. A person's dignity should never depend on whether their story is impressive enough to earn respect. The evening became a reminder that every interaction carries more meaning than what appears on the surface. People often meet strangers without knowing the experiences, challenges, and achievements those individuals carry with them. As the truth about Colonel David Williams became clear, the focus shifted from who had authority in the moment to what true leadership actually looked like. David had carried his title for years, but the qualities that defined him were not written on a uniform or displayed on a document. They were shown through patience, humility, and the decision to remain honorable when nobody knew his story. After the truth about Colonel David Williams became known, the atmosphere around the encounter began to change. What was once seen as a simple moment between a police officer and a citizen became something much deeper. It became a reminder that every decision made in a position of authority carries responsibility beyond the moment itself. Officer Jason Carter found himself reflecting on what had happened and what it revealed about the way people see one another. He had always believed that his role was to protect the community and make careful decisions. That responsibility was important to him. But this experience showed him that responsibility required more than following procedures. It required understanding the person standing in front of him. Colonel David Williams did not celebrate the fact that his identity had changed the way people viewed the situation. Instead, he focused on the lesson behind it. He knew that the most meaningful part of the encounter was not the discovery of his military rank. The meaningful part was recognizing how quickly assumptions could shape a person's opinion before the full story was known. David had spent his career in the United States Air Force learning that leadership was built on awareness and respect. A leader could not make decisions based only on what was visible. A leader had to consider the details that were not immediately obvious. The same principle applied far beyond the military. It applied to every interaction between people. Officer Carter began to understand that authority was not only about having the ability to act. It was about having the wisdom to recognize when more understanding was needed. A badge represented public trust, and that trust depended on fairness, patience, and accountability. The encounter encouraged him to look beyond the first impression and remember that every person carried a story that could not be seen at a glance. Imagine spending years believing you understand your role, then experiencing a moment that challenges you to see it from a different perspective. Imagine realizing that the greatest improvement does not come from defending every decision, but from having the courage to learn from every experience. That was the reflection Officer Carter faced. Meanwhile, David remained consistent with the values that had guided him for decades. He did not seek attention. He did not demand an apology. He understood that lasting change came from people choosing to become better, not from forcing others to feel defeated. His response showed the same discipline that had defined his military career. The story was not about one person winning and another person losing. It was about a moment that created awareness. It was about recognizing that dignity should never depend on whether someone has a respected title, a uniform, or a public reputation. Every person deserves to be treated with fairness before their achievements are revealed. As the evening came to an end, the greatest lesson became clear. Colonel David Williams had carried the title of Air Force Colonel for years, but the quality that truly defined him was something much deeper. His honor was not created by his rank. His rank only revealed the honor that was already there. And for Officer Jason Carter, the experience became a reminder that true leadership begins when a person is willing to look beyond what is immediately visible and understand the complete human story in front of them. In the days following the encounter, Colonel David Williams continued his life with the same quiet discipline he had always carried. The attention surrounding the situation did not change who he was. He had spent decades serving in the United States Air Force, and he understood that recognition was temporary, but character was permanent. For David, the most important lesson was never about proving that he had authority. It was about showing that every person deserved respect before anyone knew their achievements. Officer Jason Carter also continued reflecting on what the experience had taught him. He thought about the responsibility that came with wearing a uniform and the trust that communities placed in those who served them. He realized that authority was not measured only by the ability to make decisions. It was measured by the ability to make thoughtful decisions while remembering the humanity of the people involved. The experience changed the way he viewed everyday interactions. He began to understand that a person standing in front of him was never just a situation to handle. That person was someone with a history, a family, personal challenges, and experiences that could not be seen immediately. Colonel Williams had always believed that leadership started with listening. During his military career, he learned that strong leaders did not assume they had every answer. They created space to understand different perspectives. They recognized that every person brought something valuable, regardless of their position or background. Those lessons shaped the way he responded during difficult moments. He knew that anger could be powerful, but patience could create something much stronger. Imagine having every reason to focus on what went wrong, but choosing instead to focus on what could become better. Imagine having the ability to turn a difficult experience into a lesson that helps others grow. That was the choice David made. He did not see the moment as an opportunity to embarrass someone else. He saw it as an opportunity to remind people about the importance of fairness and understanding. Officer Carter began to see that accountability was not about admitting defeat. It was about recognizing areas where improvement was possible. True professionals were not defined by never making mistakes. They were defined by their willingness to learn and become better. The experience became a turning point in how he viewed his relationship with the community he served. He understood that trust was built through consistent actions, respectful communication, and the ability to see people as individuals rather than assumptions. Meanwhile, David continued carrying himself the same way he always had. He did not allow the experience to change his humility. His rank as an Air Force colonel represented years of dedication, but his behavior during the encounter represented something even more important. It showed the values behind the rank. It showed patience, self-control, and respect. The story became a reminder that power is not always found in the person who appears to have control of a situation. Sometimes true strength belongs to the person who remains calm when others expect a reaction. Colonel David Williams never needed to announce who he was. His actions had already introduced him, and that became the lesson left behind. The greatest form of authority is not the ability to command attention, but the ability to inspire respect through character alone. The story of Colonel David Williams and Officer Jason Carter continued to leave an important message behind, not because of the moment itself, but because of what happened afterward. The encounter became a reminder that change often begins with a single moment of reflection. For David, the experience did not become a reason to seek attention or recognition. He returned to his daily life with the same humility that had guided him for decades. His years in the United States Air Force had taught him that leadership was not about being seen as important. It was about making choices that reflected responsibility, even when nobody was watching. Colonel Williams understood that people often carry invisible stories. A person walking through a neighborhood, entering a store, or having a conversation with a stranger could have experiences that nobody around them would ever know. That understanding shaped the way he treated others. He believed that respect should never depend on someone's occupation, appearance, or accomplishments. It should exist because every person has value. Officer Jason Carter continued thinking about the encounter from a different perspective. He recognized that public service required more than knowledge and training. It required awareness of how actions affected the people being served. He began to understand that every interaction was an opportunity to build trust or create distance. The responsibility of a law enforcement officer was not only to make decisions but also to understand the people behind those decisions. The experience encouraged him to look beyond the surface and remember that first impressions were often incomplete. There was always more to discover. There was always another part of the story that could not be seen immediately. Imagine realizing that the person you thought you understood was actually someone whose life experiences were far greater than you expected. Imagine learning that the most valuable lesson was not about a title, a position, or a career achievement, but about the importance of treating people with dignity from the beginning. That was the message David hoped others would remember. He did not want people to focus only on his military service. He wanted them to understand the principle behind it. A person should not have to prove their worth before receiving respect. The value of a human being exists before recognition arrives. As time passed, the encounter became a symbol of something larger than two individuals. It represented the importance of accountability, personal growth, and the willingness to see others more clearly. Officer Carter learned that strength was not only found in making decisions quickly. Sometimes strength was found in taking the time to understand. Colonel Williams showed that confidence did not require a person to announce their accomplishments. True confidence came from knowing who you were and staying committed to your values. The difference between visible authority and true leadership became clear. A badge could represent responsibility. A military rank could represent achievement. But character was revealed through actions. The evening had started as an ordinary moment between two strangers. It ended as a lesson about perception, respect, and the hidden stories people carry every day. David Williams never needed the world to discover his rank in order to know his worth. His actions had already shown it. And for everyone who heard the story, the message remained simple. Before judging a person by what you see, remember that the most important parts of their story may be the things you cannot see at all. Years after that unforgettable evening, the story of Colonel David Williams and Officer Jason Carter remained a powerful reminder of how much can be discovered when people choose understanding over assumptions. For David, life continued much the same way it always had. He did not change because people learned about his military service. He did not become a different person because others finally recognized his achievements. The qualities that defined him had existed long before anyone knew about his rank. His patience, discipline, and humility were not created by his title. They were built through decades of commitment and service. During his time in the United States Air Force, David learned that true leadership was never about receiving attention. It was about carrying responsibility with integrity and treating people with respect, especially during difficult moments. That lesson remained with him long after his military career. He believed that every person deserved to be seen as a complete human being, not as a first impression or a quick assumption. Officer Jason Carter also carried the memory of that encounter into his future work. The experience became a reminder that every person he met had a story beyond what was visible. His role required more than making decisions. It required compassion, awareness, and the willingness to recognize that people could never be fully understood from a single moment. He learned that trust was built through actions repeated over time. It was built through fairness, communication, and the ability to treat every person with dignity. The lesson was not about one person being right and another person being wrong. It was about recognizing the opportunity to grow. David never wanted the encounter to be remembered as a story about embarrassment or conflict. He wanted it to be remembered as a story about what people can learn when they look beyond appearances. He understood that real change does not come from making someone feel defeated. Real change comes when people become more aware, more thoughtful, and more willing to understand each other. Imagine a world where people were respected before their accomplishments were known. Imagine if every person received dignity before anyone discovered their background, career, or achievements. That was the message David carried. A person should not need a title to prove that they deserve fairness. A person should not need recognition to prove that they have value. The greatest measure of character is how someone acts when there is no reward, no applause, and no advantage. Colonel David Williams had spent years earning the title of Air Force Colonel, but the most meaningful part of his story was not the position he achieved. It was the person he remained when that position was invisible. The encounter showed that visible authority and true character are not always the same thing. A uniform can represent service. A badge can represent responsibility. A title can represent achievement. But actions reveal the person behind all of those things. In the end, the world learned about Colonel David Williams because his identity was revealed. But the people who truly understood the lesson knew something more important. His greatest strength was never hidden in his rank. It was always visible in the way he treated others. And that became the lasting reminder from his story. The most powerful form of respect is the kind given before someone has to prove who they are.